Hello everyone. Welcome back to Educate Colon Snap channel. How you doing? So I wanted to kind of react to the day one experience of playing High Evolutionary. It came out yesterday morning, and so a lot of players got like a full day of testing. And I wanted to talk about the 18 Theorycrafted decks. I played through all the ones that I could. I don't have Stature or Galactus, so there were three decks out of the three crafts I could play, but I played through the other 15, and I just kind of wanted to talk about my favorite top five. And I also just wanted to talk about High Evolutionary in essence from a day perspective. I was getting a lot of questions about that. I tried to have a little statement of my thoughts, but now got to sleep and have a more updated opinion. So I think I'll start with the thoughts on High Evolutionary itself and then go on to the deck lists that I thought were pretty good, acceptable. So overall thoughts on High Evolutionary, definitely think it is going to see play, if not change anyway. I think there are definitely some cards in there that overperformed my expectations, and that would be mainly Cyclops and Hulk. I think those two cards fit really well. Abomination, I think, is also very cool, but requires more effort than Hulk does, which is maybe where it suffers in comparison. Where with Abomination you need to put lots of other synergy cards, where Hulk is a card where you just need the High Evolutionary and the Hulk itself, and that can justify playing High Evolutionary. That's my current thoughts. Just playing High Evolutionary plus Hulk, if your deck can take advantage of Hulk, is worth it. Like obviously High Evolutionary, you don't have to play it, but being able to drop down like a 20 power Hulk is just really hard for people to deal with. And yeah, you can Shang-Chi, but you have to guess it. You have to not have you have to not have priority. There's a lot of caveats where it's just easier to be the Hulk player than trying to counter the Hulk. You're not always gonna have Shang-Chi in your hand, etc., etc. So I just think that Hulk in particular is not carrying the archetype, but is the shining light. I also think the other cards aren't bad at all. So it's not. I'm not saying any of the other six are bad. I just think Hulk is very very strong. And Wasp is also very easy to include in a lot of decks. So you can just auto include Wasp in a lot of archetypes. So you're usually doing Wasp plus High Evolutionary plus Hulk, and that is a nice base while you can add other pieces there. So because of that, I do think that High Evolution is going to see a lot of play, and it's just going to be part of the meta. Don't know if it's going to be meta defining. There are still decks that do beat up on it, right? You're not really running a lot of Galactus counters currently in High Evolutionary, but I think it's kind of like Darkhawk in that it's a package deal, and then because it's easy to a flexible package, you can put in a lot of decks, right? And that's what we did, right, in the theory crafting. So I do think as people the meta settles and people start going back to their old compositions, you'll be able to make competitive, viable decks with High Evolutionary in there. So that's my day one thoughts. Obviously, if cards change or the meta really changes to be very hate centric on High Evolutionary, things might differ. But from the first day perspective, that's my thoughts about the card itself. So just keep that in mind. Now let's talk about the five decks that I really liked and why I like them. I think that's also a really important thing to talk about here. So first off, the initial deck, let's look at the first one, right? Was very almost abomination centric. And I really think that the hazmat strategy is just not very reliable. People can Luke cage you and things like that, and just using hazmat, you need a hazmat early on so that you can take advantage of the abomination, right? You can't hazmat last turn, which is what you normally wanted to do. So the synergy is kind of awkward and doesn't really fold on itself. And if people are running Luke Cage, which people tend to be running right now, you just can't take advantage of the abomination. So because of Luke Cage, it kind of messes with how abomination wants to play. And any deck that I theory crafted that ran hazmat, I really just it wouldn't hit the, it didn't wow me essentially overall. And just from a theory perspective after playing it, I can see why. Now the second list I do have, so I do have 5 lists. If you want to know them off, they're number 2, number 5, number 8, number 11, and number 13. So those are the 5 that impressed me. But number 2 is a pretty Hulk centric list. This is more the alternative way of playing where you're focusing more on Hulk. And the ability of Wave in there just kind of helps a lot in what you want to do. You can wave into Hulk last turn, or well, yeah, usually that's what you want to do, right? Because it'll stop the people flooding in the last turn, and it'll just give you that proc for the Hulk. Hulk is bugged right now, I think, where sometimes it won't gain that extra tick on the last turn, but that's the bug and it should be fixed. So theoretically, it should work where you wave and then get your final Hulk proc on the last turn. So that's been a nice tool. Yellow Jacket's probably the weirdest card in here, but I really wanted to focus on making sure that I can pass every turn to really squeeze out the value, and Yellow Jacket was an easy include because you can usually get it for 2 power for free without too much of a cost. And then we just have the Luke Cage for prevention. The armor isn't super necessary, right? This was my theory crowd. I could definitely see you changing armor for something else. I also want to say Shocker under or wasn't as good as I thought it could be, essentially. Now, I don't think it's bad. Some people seem to be saying the Shocker is bad and blah, blah, blah. I've definitely won some games because I had the Shocker -1 proc. It's just kind of hard to have the consistency unless you have lots and lots of cheap cards, which this deck does, right? Which is why it probably feels better because you can always move your Yellow Jacket out of the board if you want to make sure you're hitting a specific target. So there are some advantages to this one, but because of the wave and stuff like that, sometimes it just doesn't matter that you've made a card cheaper because people will wave you and everything costs 4 anyway. So you have to keep that in mind. But overall, I did like this one. This was the first one, and the reason is it's more Hulk focused, and it does include the wave, and it has very good defensive package. So that's the first one of the list that impressed me. Next one is number 5. So number 5 is the Thanos Lockjaw variant. I actually do think people have better versions of this list, but I did want to include it in that it was still really good. I just think that there's a lot of very Thanos specific content creators that just play Thanos on nonstop, and they'll find the optimal or the very powerful versions of this particular deck list. But I do think this one is definitely very viable and has a lot going for it. And when I played it, it felt good, right? So I'm not saying this is a bad list, right? You could probably just run this list and not care. I just think maybe the Abomination isn't necessary after playing a lot yesterday. I think you probably don't need to take advantage of the Abomination, right? You only have the Wasp and the Spider Woman and the Soul Stone, which are good, but they're not super reliable. Into the current meta, maybe it'll be better as the meta settles, but right now people just don't flood. They don't put a lot of things in one particular lane, probably due to Soulstone and things like that. So I just think people are playing around it, so it's not easy to activate the Abomination, so you could maybe take it out for something else. But it's still generally a good idea, and I had a lot of easy time climbing overall, even with all the decks. So generally think this one was good. It impressed me, and I do think you can take a Thanos Lockjaw High Evolutionary deck and do very well with it. Next up is number 8. Number 8 was the Zabu Darkhawk version. I think this one is nice, especially because there's so many people running Thanos right now that your Darkhawk just does a lot of work generally. So this is a nice deck into kind of what people are playing. But even when people weren't playing Thanos, like as long as you're getting your Zabu on too, I think this deck did really well. I will say if you do want to change this particular list up a little bit, the one thing you probably could do is take out the Shocker. So Shocker is kind of nice because if you hit a 4, you can play the 4 on 3 regardless. So it doesn't matter that you don't have the Zabu. But some people really want the Luke Cage, right? So you can definitely just say, okay, I don't care about Shocker. It's not that important. Luke Cage is maybe more important to me, and I think that's a very reasonable take there. So I'm just adjusting my own deck list to kind of fit based on my play over the time. So I do think that's fine. You could still keep the Shocker. Honestly, don't think the Luke Cage is super necessary unless you're flooding, which this deck does tend to do. So that's why I do have the suggestion here. But overall, I do think this deck still works really well. Has a lot of good things going for it. I think the Moon Girl is actually pretty good, and using Scorpion to proc your Abomination, I just and Wasp, using Wasp and Scorpion to proc your Abomination, I just think is the better way of doing it compared to using Hazmat. And even though you a lot of times you can't get it to 0 with the Sarah. I've definitely had a lot of games where, or a decent amount of games where the Abomination did cause 0 with the Sarah drop off. So you do have to be a little bit careful about wave, especially if you're playing into particularly when you know they're running wave. But if they're not doing that, you can definitely get like double Abomination final turn for 0 plus like 3-4 drops, which is just like, yeah, like it's kind of crazy. So definitely think it's kind of good. Another thing you can do here, if I were to make another suggestion, is maybe add um Shang-Chi. Just because a lot of people are running Hulk, right? So you could definitely just say, you know what, I'd rather have a Shang-Chi here. I think if I were going to remove one of them, it'd probably be the Thing. I think that's maybe not the most important card in here. It is good for the Abomination, so you could say, maybe that's fine, and you'd rather just take out the Enchantress, which is also fine. I guess you could take out the Moon Girl. Yeah, I guess you could take out the Moon Girl. Maybe that's the alternative if you wanna play the Shang-Chi. You do something like that. But I was impressed by this deck. That's the reason why I'm highlighting it, and I definitely think maybe a tweak or two could really fit the meta that you're in. Next up we have is 11. So number 11 is the one that impressed me the most, or like surprised me the most playing it. This is the one I'm like wanting to experiment more with. So here we just went Lockjaw without Thanos and just put a lot of big cards. Now, the reason why this one really surprised me, I will say first of all, it was due to the location, right? So the location on turn 5 plays a random card from your hand. As you can see, a lot of our hand is very huge, so that did kind of help. But I've played it after the featured location and still felt pretty good. I just think there's not enough Shang-Chi's running around, so getting Lockjaw to pull anything big just kind of gives you that free win condition straight up. And also, you take advantage of Hulk very well as well. So you're not playing anything on 1. You're a lot of times you're not playing anything on 2 and stuff like that. So very easy. Your Hulk is like 16, 18 power for free. So, and you're running the Childers for consistency. So this one I really was surprised. I didn't think it would feel as good as it did when I was playing it. So definitely like this. If you like Lockjaw and you want to play, you don't have Thanos and things like that, I definitely think this can be the one for you. I had a lot of fun with this one. So this one I've been playing afterwards. Like this was the one deck that after I was done testing all the 15 that I played, I went back to this one. This was the one I was like, oh my, I had a lot of fun with this one in particular. So that's definitely the one I'm going to be looking at and seeing if I can tweak in some way to really, feel refined. But yeah. And then the last one I wanted to include was number 13. So number 13 was a bounce heavy deck. So we kind of took the bounce engine and we put High Evolutionary in it, and it felt pretty good. So you get to so the thing is bounce is already pretty good, and people are playing wave to counter it, right? So that's the main issue here. If you want to take advantage of it, you kind of have to pop off um on 5, but it means you can't kitty pride. So there's definitely some downsides to playing into a lot of wave, but it did feel good, right? Like especially if and people are not gonna have wave every single time, right? Like that's something people like to say, oh yeah, if you have wave, you auto lose and stuff like that. Not necessarily the case, but it did feel pretty good while I was playing it. Just like bouncing Wasp or playing Wasp against Scorpion, coming out early, and you still have the procs of the Kitty on the Angela. So obviously, the one downside is wave meta, and I think that's a whole separate video in itself, like how wave is affecting archetypes. But this did feel pretty good when I played it, and that's kind of the question we're asking, right? What decks of the 15 that you played felt the best or felt really good? These are the ones that I wanted to take note of. As you can see, none of them do have hazmat. I think that one really didn't shine. I do have a lot of abominations in the list, right? But not all of them. But the decks I'm running are pretty what is it, tempo oriented, so the abominations do help in that way. So and usually just relying on Scorpion and Wasp is actually a pretty reliable way. You're not going to get it for 0, but you're going to get it for like 2 or 3, which is pretty good, right? 3 mana 9 is pretty strong. So overall, those are the 5 deck lists, right? If we go through them again, I think I have a list, right? It's number 2, number 5, number 8. That's not number 5. Number 5, number 8, number 11, and number 13. So, hope you guys have an updated. I'm definitely going to keep working on High Evolutionary. I know there's so much to be discovered with this card, so we'll definitely get there. Take care of yourselves. Have a wonderful rest of the day, and I'll see you in the next one. Once you watch him, you won't go back. He'll teach you to marvel snap.